Welcome to the third video in our series on discernment of spirits. Again, my name is Father Brian Christopher. I'm a member of the Jesuit community here in Belize. And once again, it's nice to be with you and share some thoughts on discernment. I hope it's making sense so far. So in the previous video, we spoke about some of these basic dynamics of discernment of spirits. And we use these two terms that are really important: consolation and desolation. And consolation, to refresh your memory, is the experience of drawing closer to God. Desolation, on the other hand, is the experience of getting further away from God. Consolation feels like your heart is opening up. And you experience this increase in you, faith and hope and love and joy and peace. Desolation, on the other hand, often feels like your heart is closing, like your heart is becoming smaller and harder. And you experience things like anxiety, discouragement, or despair. Now, how do you use these concepts of consolation and desolation concretely? Okay, let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say that you start thinking, you're in the shower, you're cleaning up, and you start thinking about an argument that you had with your brother that morning. And the more you think about it, the angrier you get at that guy. And you begin to you begin to think about all the things that he said to you. You start ruminating about it. You start rehearsing all of that. And then you begin to imagine how the next time you see him, you're really going to give him a piece of your mind. You're going to tell him about himself. Now, is this consolation or desolation? If you're reflecting on what you're feeling, the more you think about that argument with your brother, what happens to your heart? Is it opening or is it closing? I'd speculate that it's closing. You're getting yourself all worked up, and as you do so, you're making it harder and harder to reconcile with him. You're feeling less and less love and compassion towards him. And you're weaving a story in your head that pits you as the victim. How dare he treat me like that? Doesn't he know who I am? And the more you do that, the more unhappy you become. The more disturbed and anxious you become. You become the opposite of peaceful. But here's the good news. Once you recognize that that thought in your head is leading you down that pathway, you can say, wait a second. I don't like where these thoughts are leading me, and you can begin to see how going down that pathway is going to lead you to desolation. And you can hit pause, and you can say, I see what's going on here. This is not from God. God is not leading me down this path. Okay, now let me complicate things a little further. It might sound to some of you like what I'm saying is that consolation feels good and desolation feels bad. But it's way more complex than that. Sometimes consolation can feel horrible. And sometimes desolation, at least early on, can feel kind of good. And let me give you some examples. When my parents died, I felt horrible. I was crying, I was tired all the time, and I was a mess. And yet when I look back on those moments, I would say that those moments are consolations. Why? Why would I say that? Well, the pain that I was feeling was the result of the great love that I had for them. That's why. The pain was just the flip side of love. And more than that, as I sat there with the pain and the tears, what did I feel like doing? I felt like praying. I felt like asking God for help. I was experiencing through that grief an increase of love in my heart. And as painful as it was, that's a sign of consolation. And I felt drawn to prayer, as desperate as I was. And that too is a sign of consolation. It didn't feel good, but that grief was bringing me closer to God. It was bringing me closer to love. Let's look at a different example, right? So sometimes when desolation doesn't feel bad, but when desolation feels good. How about gossiping, right? Gossiping feels kind of good, doesn't it? When I gossip about people, it gives me that sense of power. Like, I know things that other people don't know, and I'm gonna share with them. And by sharing with them, that's gonna make me seem like I'm in the know. You know what? And when I share gossip with another person, very often it's because I wanna build some kind of affiliation with that person. I wanna get close to the person. So this is a way, I'm gonna share with you a little tidbit of data, and you're gonna say, yeah. I'm gonna say, boy, you know what Ian did the other day? Oh my gosh, what a mess. And you're gonna say, oh, I know, that guy drives me crazy. And all of a sudden, you've got this bond with this other person. And your bond is based on your dislike of Ian or whoever. Gossiping feels good, but is it consolation? No, it's desolation. Why? Because even though it feels good, I'm not growing in love. Even though it feels good, my heart is starting to close. And here's the other thing that I've learned about gossip. While at first it might feel good, after you do it for a while, when you keep doing it, it starts to feel kind of dirty. My conscience starts to get to me. All of a sudden, I'm not proud of who I am. I don't like who I am when I gossip. So while it feels good at first, you keep walking down that road, you're gonna find that it feels worse and worse and worse. Now, you might have noticed that I'm talking a lot about emotions in these videos. You might be wondering, what does all that have to do with prayer? When it comes to discernment, God speaks the language of emotion. And if you want to do discernment, you first have to learn to pay attention and to identify these different emotional movements inside of you. Remember that the word discernment means to sort through or to sort out. And that's what we're sorting out. And that's harder than it sounds, especially for men, right? In Western cultures, men aren't usually socialized to show emotion. If you say to a typical man in Western culture, how you doing? He's gonna say, fine, good. He might say, oh, bad, if he's having a bad day. And you're like, well, maybe we could use more words than just those three, right? But that takes time and that takes learning, and it's hard. Again, when we're not raised to identify emotions, we tend to miss out on what's going on inside of us. And we do so at the detriment of our own spiritual lives. Discernment is about bringing our whole selves to prayer, and especially the parts of us that are hidden most of the time. But doing that takes time and practice, right? But it's worth the time and the practice. It's worth the effort. One of the great tasks of the spiritual life is to learn to increase our emotional awareness, to increase our emotional vocabulary, so that we can start to notice with much greater detail all the nuances and subtleties of our emotions. And when we do that, we're gonna find that we will be able to recognize all those subtle and nuanced ways that God is working in us and through us. Thanks.